Thank you ever so much for such a warm and generous welcome. I've had a wonderful day here in London. We started off our day with a visit to Saunders Secondary School, one of the largest schools in the city, a sizable Aboriginal student population, about 170 Aboriginal students. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me to see some of the good work that's being done to foster better relations between the community that I'm from and society generally, and to witness the very determined effort being made by the authorities to ensure that our communities come together in a healthy and respectful way. And what was especially encouraging about my visit there was that we started off the event with the drum group, and they rendered 2 songs, and the singers were young people. And that would have been something that would have never been experienced by myself and my peers and others when we were in school. As noted by Minister Bentley, I was 10 years in 2 residential schools, and the drum is the last thing you'd ever expect to find in a residential school. And here we are in the middle of London, and in one of the larger high schools, and there's a drum group and students from the school singing for us. And then, when we were finished with that conversation, I was then invited to the university, and I was interviewed by this very fine gentleman, Dan Smoke, who's better than Charlie Rose. I'm absolutely convinced of that, and I know most of you know Charlie Rose. Dan was very gentle with me today. He kept me busy, focused, and with his many questions about life generally, about First Nations and issues important to us, but more importantly, challenges that we all face as a country. And then he turned it over to the students, and I was really very much challenged, because I encountered some very thoughtful questions, and I didn't necessarily have a full answer for every question that was presented to me, but it certainly made me think. And what I found most impressive beyond these very thoughtful questions was that I was struck by the intelligence, the passion, the emotion, the commitment, and the determination on the part of those students that were present there and asking questions about what we needed to do together to fix the things that have troubled this country for a long, long time. As I said, there's emotion demonstrated there, and it is a powerful reminder that while we believe that Canada, and I'm one of those people that do believe that Canada is the best country in the world, there's much that still troubles our country. And that is one of the subjects that I wanted to raise with you this evening. But before I begin my presentation, I want to thank very, very sincerely Dan Smook for his wonderful, incredibly wise words. And it was really an offering to all of us. And I urge you to accept it in the spirit that it was given to us here this evening, with great generosity and much kindness. And then, of course, the good words by my friend, the Honorable Minister Chris Bentley. Thank you very much, Minister Bentley, for a very generous introduction. And, of course, thank you to all of you for being here this evening. I'm going to do two things here tonight, if you will allow me. One, I'm going to refer to my written text. And what I'm going to talk about is not so much legacy in the future of First Nations and human rights and Canada's responsibilities. I'll deal with that at the conclusion of my lecture this evening. And that will be not from the script, but I want to talk to you about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that very important piece of work. So the first part of this lecture this evening is about the importance of First Nations to Canada. And this is a subject that I've discussed previously at different audiences, but I thought important that we have this conversation this evening. And I know that, at least that's an assumption on my part, that most people in this room seldom or ever think about the importance of First Nations to Canada. Right? But for those of us who are First Nations citizens and Aboriginal people, we think about it every day. It is about who we are and what our place is in this society. It is about identity, citizenship, belonging, history, and participation. Most of all, it is about survival. And I will address this topic through three interlocking themes. First, the importance of First Nations to Canada's relationship with the environment and sustainable development. Second, the importance of First Nations to Canada's identity as a nation. And third, the importance of our people to Canada's economic future and its well-being. So, turning to the first theme, the importance of our people, First Nations, to the environment and sustainable development. In the middle of the 20th century, we saw our planet from space for the very first time. Like the Copernican revolution of the 16th century, this vision had a similar revolutionary impact. Just as the people of the 16th century had to come to terms with the fact that the Earth was not the center of the universe, the picture beamed to us from outer space showed the Earth to be a small, fragile ball. For the first time, we saw the Earth as an organism whose health depends on the health of all of its parts. A delicate balance of clouds, ocean, greenery, soils, animal, and human life. The view from space made it abundantly clear that balance is the key to survival. And the popular view that the Earth is a limitless resource at the disposal of the human species has to be rethought. Across the globe, there is now a growing awareness that cultural diversity and ecological balance are linked, and that both are of critical importance for the rebalancing of ourselves with the environment. Distinct cultures, with their unique knowledge and understandings of the world around them, need to contribute to the understandings upon which the survival of the planet depends. Indigenous cultures, especially, are finally beginning to be recognized for the added value we bring to this field. The Royal Commission on Environment and Development recognized that the world has a great deal to learn from the traditional knowledge of indigenous people for the management and balancing of very complex ecological systems. In its report, Our Common Future, the Commission says that if we lose the vast accumulations of traditional knowledge and experience that link us with our ancient origins, it will be a huge loss not just for indigenous peoples worldwide, but for all of humanity. For indigenous people, environmental stewardship is a matter of cultural and economic survival, which goes far beyond politics and boundaries. It is a way of seeing the world with both practical and spiritual dimensions, much as we heard from Elder Smook this evening. If for no other reason than enlightened self-interest, Canadians should protect and nourish this important indigenous heritage before it disappears. It is a terrible irony that as formal development reaches more deeply into remote areas, it tends to destroy the only cultures that have proved able to thrive in these environments. We are seeing this happen in Nunavut, where for thousands of years the Inuit people thrived in the most forbidding of environments. Yet today, so many of its young people have succumbed to drug addiction and suicide because they cannot cope with the development that has come to their lands. It is inevitable that development in remote areas will continue to expand and that it will disrupt and endanger the traditional ways of life. The challenge is to figure out how to minimize the cultural and ecological harm while ensuring that local populations benefit and thrive. We have learned that the vulnerability of our people increases in direct proportion to the degree to which we are excluded from development decisions. While we are not opposed to development per se, we are opposed to the style of development which ignores our traditional practices, takes our lands from us, and pollutes our environment. We are all for responsible development. This can be avoided if our traditional rights to the land and its resources are recognized and enforced. Land claims must be settled so that ownership is clear. We also must have our own institutions of government to regulate rights and obligations that can enforce responsibility in resource use. This way, local communities, our communities, will have a meaningful voice in the decisions about resource use in their areas and territories. In addition, if development projects are to take place in remote communities, positive measures must be taken to enhance the well-being of the people living there in ways appropriate to the group's lifestyle. For example, earnings from traditional activities such as arts and crafts or hunting and fishing can be increased through the introduction of marketing arrangements that ensure a fair price or by conserving the resource base and increasing productivity. It must be recognized that a fine line exists between keeping people in unwanted isolation and wantonly destroying their lifestyles. Avoiding both of these extremes requires careful human resource development. Before new projects are started in isolated areas, health facilities should be developed to supplement and improve traditional practices. Nutritional deficiencies should be corrected and appropriate educational institutions established. Steps should also be taken to ensure that community members fully benefit from such projects, particularly through jobs, but beyond that. We're now witness to proposed developments in the northwestern part of British Columbia. And the offer on the table there through Enbridge has now set a new industry standard. Right? So we're moving beyond just being anxious for jobs from these resource development undertakings. We are thinking more in proactive terms as reactive, because, for example, when we talk about, I'll deviate from my written text for a minute here, when we talk about impact-benefit agreements, that's in relation to resource development projects. In my view, that's more reactive response to development. A more proactive approach speaks to the issue of the implementation of rights in these areas. And that'll be the next battleground. Once we've taken our thinking and approach beyond reacting to proposed developments and developments of one kind or another. And it's going to be an interesting situation for all of us. In summary, we are important to Canada for what we can bring to the stewardship of the environment. We can contribute our unique knowledge and experience to the development of effective systems of environmental management to ensure that better decisions are taken and that development proceeds in sustainable ways which will protect the environment for future generations of all Canadians. Turning now to my second theme, the importance of First Nations to Canada's identity. It is straight but true that the first step in establishing our identity as a nation is to know who we are and where we have come from. Each of us in this room was born into a culture, and each of us secured our own personal identity through the group into which we were born. Furthermore, each of us desires the respect and recognition of fellow Canadians and the protection of the state for our identities. This is what people call their birthright. Since Confederation and even before, Canadian politicians have struggled with the problem of our national birthright and identity. Who are we as a nation? Where did we come from? And where are we going? It is often said we Canadians have a better understanding of who we are not rather than who we are. An historical overview of relations between Indigenous people and non-Aboriginal people in Canada reveals where the identity problem begins. It shows us that Canada has not yet come to terms with its origins, its Indigenous North American foundations, and the responsibilities they engender. As a result, the image Canada holds out to the world and to its own citizens does not ring true. When our people go public with our grievances, at Oka, at Caledonia, you mean the area of conflict, it is just the tip of the iceberg. These events are manifestations of a long history of denial of this country's identity. Canada's much heralded commitment to human rights and equality does not resonate with the First Peoples in this country. Our history with Canada shot through with inequality, coercion, and fraud, broken promises, failed accords, stereotypes, misrecognition, paternalism, distrust, resentment, and sometimes rage. That has been our history. The reality is that Canadian culture, values, and institutions are missing our presence. This very unique perspective that we represent in Canada. Confederation is incomplete. We have not been allowed to participate in the creation of the federal union, nor have we acquired a just accommodation within it. We do not see ourselves reflected in Canada's public institutions, such that we can feel secure for our individual and collective identities. In the result, Canada both undermines our Indigenous cultures and languages, and in so doing, denies its own true identity. Although Canadian identity is admittedly a complex concept, any honest discussion about what its identity is must begin with the understanding that Canada was founded at the expense of the Indigenous peoples. Yet when we look back, we discover that this most fundamental of historical facts has been deliberately obscured, while the country is built on a set of false premises. Throughout the 19th century, the engagement of the federal government with the First Peoples in Canada was based on the presumption that we would become extinct. Government policies were built on this premise. When it became evident that extinction was not going to happen, the federal government embarked on a related policy of assimilation. This policy presumed our languages and cultures were not worth preserving, and that Canada would be better off without them. Most notably and tragically, its implementation took the form of industrial and residential schools designed to kill the Indian in the child. This policy, too, ultimately failed after 150 years, but not before causing enormous havoc in our communities while deepening the confusion about national identity in the broader community, about who we are and where we have come from. When public policy is rooted in disrespect of another culture, as Canada's policies have been, cultural differences come to be seen by the public as deficiencies and disabilities. So when a child enters school speaking his or her indigenous language, they are considered backward. I experienced that many, many times. In fact, we were convinced that the best route to success was to completely disregard who we were and to embrace fully as possible the dominant culture. And English was the most significant element in that process. Or when a father engages in seasonal hunting or trapping or fishing, as is the case in a number of our communities, to provide for his extended family, he is perceived as an unreliable worker. You've heard that, I'm sure. These attitudes erode self-respect and encourage dependency and self-abuse, thus completing and affirming the vicious circle of subordination and discrimination. The Royal Commission on Aboriginal People, during its investigation of the Canadian identity, heard the views of thousands of its citizens, of Canada's citizens. One who provided his thoughts was an elderly Aboriginal gentleman who had this to say. A story was told a long time ago. An old man told us that we look at the future. What would we like to see? 4 children came from these 4 directions. A white child from the north, a red child from the east, a yellow child from the south, and a black child from the west. They walked together and they peered into the mirror of life. They joined hands, and when they looked in there, all they saw was the Creator. That's all they saw. They saw no animosity. They saw no color. They saw the Creator. My interpretation of this old man's story is that the children represent his vision of the future identity of Canada, an identity we have not yet achieved. It is a vision of a balance where future generations of Canadians come together in harmony and form mutually beneficial relationships. The children are not just Indigenous or Aboriginal or First Nations. The colors represent all of the various peoples and cultures that make up humanity. They walk together, and despite their differences, they form balanced and equitable relationships. It is this vision of Canadian identity that has informed my work throughout my years as a politician. Respectful coexistence is a common theme in everything we do, but we cannot achieve this vision on our own. To achieve it, public attitudes must change, both at the individual and at the institutional level. We must carefully examine our public institutions, their makeup and their practices and symbols to ensure that they reflect and embody Canada's true identity and history, and that they respect our cultures and languages, which are such an integral part of it. Without the recognition that we are the original inhabitants of this land, and as such we have distinctive rights and responsibilities, Canada lives a lie. At the same time, First Nations must recognize that non-Aboriginal people are also of this land by birth and by adoption, and that they too have rights and responsibilities. Mutual recognition implies equality and coexistence where both parties govern themselves according to their own laws and institutions. The coexistence we propose is not a coexistence of separation and isolation. Quite the contrary. The partnership we want is an interdependent one, which will ensure that policies of assimilation and extinguishment will never again be imposed on us, and that our cultures will be protected and preserved through our own government institutions. As far as self-government is concerned, there is no more fundamental principle in our heritage, as well as in the heritage of the broader Canadian society. The notion of self-government underpins federal-provincial arrangements and explains the basic division of powers. It is also the basis of our treaty-making relationship with Canada, and was reflected first in the Royal Proclamation of 1763. When the original 4 provinces joined Confederation in 1867, they got what we wanted. They retained the equal right to govern themselves under their own laws and in accordance with their own cultures. In the case of Quebec, the Constitution acknowledged its distinctive legal system, language, and schools. All the provinces obtained guarantees that the federal government could not intrude into their exclusive spheres, abolish them, or diminish their powers. Instead of securing the guarantees the provinces achieved, our self-governing status within Canada was sharply accentuated during the 18th and 19th centuries when governments shamelessly encroached upon our rights, continuously ignored the treaties, and took our lands from us. We are excluded from the nation-building process and the economic development and wealth creation that went with it. Consequently, we became increasingly marginalized, powerless, alienated, and impoverished. We believe the federal-provincial relationship provides a model for many of the features that would characterize a sound relationship between our governments and Canada. It is important to understand we don't want to undo the Canadian Federation. We want to complete it. Recognizing our governments as one of the three orders of government would truly acknowledge the indigenous foundations upon which this country was built. It would reflect our history and our heritage as a nation. It would give Canada an authentic identity, and it would give legitimacy to all its inhabitants. I believe this is important for Canada. Now to my third and final theme, the importance of First Nations to Canada's economy. Everything I have talked about so far is related to this topic. Our importance to Canada is integrally linked to unsettled land claims, political change, development, environmental stewardship, culture, and Canadian identity. The total annual cost to Canadian society of our marginalization amounts to about 1% of the gross national product. This cost is collectively borne by all Canadians. It will continue to be incurred year after year and will escalate as long as the current policies that impoverish our peoples remain in place. Eliminating those costs through fundamental policy change is the best argument for implementing a new agenda. The economic disadvantage of our people is deeply rooted. Disparities in income, employment, and educational attainment compared to the rest of society far exceed acceptable levels. At the same time, our population is experiencing rapid growth. Our population of working-age people is expected to expand by nearly 250,000 by 2016. an increase of 48.6% in 20 years, compared with an increase of 23.4% for the same group in the Canadian population as a whole. We've been extremely busy, and we will continue to be busy for a long time. We have to catch up. We are optimistic that under the right conditions, we could and would turn the economic fortunes of our people around. But again, we cannot do this alone. The right conditions include, first and foremost, settlement of the many outstanding land claims in every part of the country. Just for specific claims, there are over 1,000 specific claims. And these are related to treaty violations. Treaty violations that include improper and illegal surrender of our lands, the outright theft of our lands, the abrogation of federal responsibility, the breach of fiduciary responsibility. Right? These are specific claims, and they exist in just about every part of the country. Then we have the unsettled areas of Canada. Right? And so we all know that the uncertainty that these unsettled matters it creates is really problematic in so many ways. If land claims were settled and resources restored, we would experience significant economic growth in the resource-producing areas. All of the studies that have ever been done demonstrate that when we control our resources and related businesses, we prosper very significantly. We invest in local communities, and regional economies expand. A larger part of the income generated stays in the region instead of being transferred to the urban areas or out of the country. And of course, this generates more local spending and creates the kind of employment opportunities that we seek. This, coupled with self-government, a better educated workforce, and healthy communities with decent housing, would empower our citizens, attract more investment funds and create greater development opportunities. There are many other economic opportunities that can be pursued in our communities as well. The cultural tourism sector, the arts, specialty foods, clothing, pharmaceuticals, sports and recreation, as well as in construction and service if the necessary conditions are put in place. And of course, we had a plan to do exactly that. And we fell short as a country. We had worked so hard. We had engaged so many people. We brought our best ideas to the table. In fact, it took us 18 months with 1,000 people involved in the process to design a plan that was about turning the corner. It was about closing the gap in the quality of life that exists between our people and the rest of the country. It took 18 months, 1,000 people. And at the end of this, our plan was considered so sound because it had real targets and real outcomes. It was embraced by 14 jurisdictions in the country. All of the territorial governments, every provincial government, the federal government. Unprecedented in federal-provincial relations to have such overwhelming support for something as important as this undertaking was. And if this plan had been implemented, we would have created the conditions necessary to transform our communities into positive places, healthy, safe communities where our children could flourish and they could actually live their dreams, right? But it didn't succeed. There was a change of government, and we all know what happened to the Communal Accord. And we've deprived ourselves, really. When I say we, I'm talking about Canada. What an incredible opportunity. We would have fixed something that has bedeviled successive governments for such a long time. And what has been placed before us as instead of this wonderful opportunity is the status quo. And it is simply unacceptable. A failure to create and foster the conditions needed to advance our economic situation will cause increasing losses of production and income, which are now over $5.8 billion a year and growing. But the cost of losing this opportunity is more than financial. There is a huge social cost and increasingly major cost to our peaceful coexistence. The frustration among our people is growing, especially among our young folks. We see this in the cities and on reserves with formation of gangs and increased lawlessness. These costs are immeasurable and easily avoided, but they will be borne by our people and by all Canadians unless we achieve progress. On the positive side, our people are ready. Many, as you know, are participating very successfully in the Canadian economy, both in every part of the country, and urban as well as rural communities. And we all know that within the next decade, Canada will face a labor shortage. By 2016, there will be more Canadians leaving the workforce than entering it. We have a population that is now just coming of age that can fill this gap. We all know that there are diamonds in the Northwest Territories as well as in rural Ontario. Of course, these diamonds are on Indian land and our territories. Huge gas reserves in so many parts of the north. The oil sands are right in the middle of 7 First Nation communities. In Alberta, Squamish sits on some of the most valuable real estate in Vancouver, Musqueam, Burrell, Tawasin. And we all recognize, I hope we do, that cooperation from First Nations is essential for the successful development of these projects. Just some that I noted. And we've seen what can happen if First Nations are not involved at every stage of the proposed developments. The Mackenzie Valley Pipeline, for example. And that has been around for over 30 years. We have now finally achieved approval from the federal government, but whether it ever gets off the ground is still a big question mark. And to underline this one point, and I noted this earlier in my comments, our people are not anti-development. We're not opposed to development. But what we want to ensure is that development is responsible, sustainable, and we want to share in every part of the development. We don't want to be brought in at the tail end of these developments. So what I want to do now is speak to you about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I won't do it long because I notice people are getting a little tired. It's been a long day for most of you, and I don't want to prolong the evening unnecessarily. And then I will conclude, coming back to my text. In both of the sessions that I participated in today, at the high school and at the university with the Aboriginal student population, it is so evident. And I tried to make the point earlier here, and I want to underline this, that Canada has been absent this unique perspective that we represent. And the history that we've learned has been distorted Right? It has been missing a fundamental, an essential chapter. Right? And that chapter deals with our people. Right? The missing chapter in Canadian history. And so what we've done, because we haven't made an effort to ensure that we incorporate the history of Indigenous peoples in what we teach our kids, we've been denying ourselves an opportunity to grow as a country. Right? And in the process of growing based on reality, right, we strengthen ourselves. And the best example of the absence of this important part of our history is the residential school experience. You can go into most schools in the country, high schools, junior high schools, elementary schools, community colleges, universities. If you were to engage students in all of these institutions, the people responsible to educate and teach these people, if you were to ask them about residential schools, the residential school experience, most would have to plead ignorance. It couldn't tell you that this experience actually was here in Canada, that it affected directly 150,000 students, that this experience persisted for 150 years, and that children, innocent children, were horribly abused in these schools in your good name, right? Because as I said, these schools were designed to eradicate any sense of Indianness in this country. Because what we represented was seen as not being good enough. We had to be molded into something that was so completely foreign to who we were as a people. Our languages, our cultures, our traditions, everything that we were, our integrity, our dignity, was dismissed, cast aside. And the people that ran these schools were, in our view, the closest thing to God, right? The churches, the church people. 4 major denominations: Presbyterian, United, Anglican, and the Catholic Church entities. In fact, the Catholic Church ran the largest number of the schools, right? 80%. And so, here we have this situation, this experience that is so fundamentally, of such fundamental importance to understanding the differences that exist today, and ought really to be a part of our living experience, if I can put it that way. And this has been, we've done a disservice to ourselves. Right? We've done a disservice to ourselves. And not a good situation. When we first started talking about abuse in schools, no one believed that this actually happened. Right? The people that actually had the courage to speak about their experiences were seen as whiners, complainers, not to be believed. I mean, they were not speaking the truth. They wanted attention. They were, people that needed help. And absolutely true, they needed help. Right? And it took us a long, long time to finally convince enough people that this was all about the truth, and that we as a country needed to come to grips with this part of our history. And it was through the courage and determination of the living survivors and the memory of those that have passed on that made it possible for us to press our case. Right? And when our initial overtures fell on deaf ears, we turned to the courts. People filed civil suits. They brought charges against those people that had abused them. And as soon as these people were able to demonstrate their determination and their courage, it offered others the courage to do the same. And the numbers increased significantly over a very short period of time. And this caught the attention of the government. Because at one point, there were as many as 12,000 of these individual claims in the courts. And what we had been offered, as you will recall, in 1998 was the Statement of Reconciliation and $350 million to establish a healing fund, and became the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, created to begin an important healing process in our communities. And it became very obvious that the courts was not the place for this issue, because we were not dealing with a matter that was strictly about torts law, where we pay individual compensation to people that have been hurt in some way. We were talking about the most massive violation of human rights in the country. And the courts were in no position to deal with this matter. We needed something that was less adversarial, a process that would recognize that for what it was, human rights violations, and a process that was designed to actually bring the country together, to heal the nation, to bring about reconciliation, to make our country whole. That's what this is in the end all about. Right? When we finally convinced the government that their initial offer to us was really woefully inadequate, because they are concerned about paying a few bucks to a few individuals. The number 12,000 jumps to mind because that was the number that were in the courts. And that's what the government was prepared to deal with. In fact, we were dealing with thousands upon thousands of people that had been affected by the experience. And we persevered, we pushed, and government finally listened to everything that we had been saying about this experience and why it was so important that we bring about some resolution. Right? And I'll share with you a very important moment in this long, drawn-out process, because it took a considerable period of time. And I have a tendency to remember on too long, so remind me to bring this to a conclusion quickly. Remember when John Paul died? John Paul II. And I was invited to be part of the Canadian delegation by the Prime Minister, Right Honorable Paul Martin. There were 5 of us in the delegation, the official delegation. Of course, there were a number of other people that went from every party and others. And so we flew off to Rome to attend the funeral. Of course, we checked into the hotel, and I couldn't, for about 10 minutes, couldn't figure out how to turn on the light. This worldly guy that was traveling across the ocean. And I was too embarrassed to call downstairs to ask them for instructions on how to turn on the power in this fancy room I was in. Anyway, we're invited. We get a message that the Prime Minister is inviting us to dinner. So off we go to dinner at this fine Italian restaurant, and Mr. Martin is just the most gracious individual. I have such enormous respect for this person. We had a conversation over dinner about residential schools. And this wasn't the first one, by the way. He'd called me a number of times, pushing me to explain to him why it was important that we resolve this. Right? What it would mean for Canada, what it would do for the people that had been abused, what it would do for our community, and what it would do to bring people together. And in fact, he dropped in my office one time, right? We were on Albert Street. Unheard of for a Prime Minister to just drop by to pay a visit to the National Chief. And I was over for dinner, 24 Sussex another time, but this was the moment. And so we were having this conversation, and to my right was Jason Kenney, who is now the Minister of Immigration, and next to Jason Kenney was Rob Nicholson, now Justice Minister, and next to Nicholson, now the Right Honourable Stephen Harper. Right? And we were having this very involved conversation. I don't think these guys were paying any attention to this conversation. And the Prime Minister probed and pressed me, and he wanted to be convinced that it was the right thing to do. And after we were done, he said, "Phil, we will get it done. We will get it done." And up until that point, Justice Canada had dug in its heels, right? And the minister responsible for this file, of course, taking advice from justice officials, wasn't prepared to bend and to accept the proposition that the Assembly of First Nations had made, right, in our report, and where we described the elements of a settlement agreement. And so when we returned, there was like a breath of fresh air. And people in Justice Canada talked about, and then the Pope died, right? That moment, and the Pope died. And it made such a huge difference, right? And we ended up, as you know, with the largest settlement in Canadian history. Minimum cash value of $5 billion. Right? And every living survivor that was alive on the day we signed the political agreement, May 2005, was eligible to be compensated for being a resident at a residential school. And then we had a commemoration fund. We had the apology of June 11, 2008, this special moment in our history that did so much to bring about true healing and reconciliation in our lives. And what I believe is will be the lasting legacy of the settlement agreement is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There have been 63 truth commissions in every part of the world. Most of these, if not all, have been in third world countries. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission here that was established as a result of the settlement agreement is the very first time that a first world country has ever agreed to establish such an undertaking. And this is so very important for the country. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission must be a conversation with Canadians. It can't be just about the survivors. We already know about the experience. We've lived the experience. It can't be confined or contained with the living survivors. This must be about Canada. This must be a conversation, Canadians. This must be seen as an opportunity to learn and know about our people, to know what was done to us, right? And to understand the consequences of what was done to us. It has to be about you, right? Absolutely. You have to embrace this as as yours. This must be seen as your Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You must see this for what it is, an opportunity to make Canada a better place. Right? To learn not just about the survivors, not just to learn about the First Peoples, but to learn about yourselves. Right? And to resolve with us, right, that never again will this kind of experience ever be imposed on anyone for the rest of time. Right? And this is the opportunity you have, right, with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It only has 5 short years to do this very important work. And I encourage you to learn about it and to reach out to the people that are responsible for carrying out this very important work. And I guarantee you that we will all be better as a result. Thank you ever so much for being so patient this evening. Thank you.